Alrighty, so I made a video about this next story before, but it just wasn't that good. Plus, I got a lot of flack for not pronouncing this guy's name correctly, which, if you know me, I don't really care too much about proper pronunciation. So, in good fun to anger the internet academia Nazis, but with no disrespect to the family name of this man, I'm still going to pronounce this guy's name the way I want to. But, just so you know, this is the story of Issac Ebbey. But first, I gotta tell you, making this show is extremely fun, and I like to make as much content for you guys as possible, but I got bills to pay. I don't ask for donations, that's not my thing, but I do provide you with a service. I spend hours upon hours making videos like this, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you do enjoy the show, and you also enjoy making coffee at home, consider ordering your coffee from me. You'll get really freaking good coffee, and you'll be supporting the show, so I can make bigger and better videos for you. I got big plans, but shallow pockets. So please, head on over to tranquilocoffee.com today and order some of my coffee. Enter in my name, Ricky, at checkout for 10% off. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show. It's August 14th. The house is quiet. It's the end of the night. Supper has been served and enjoyed solemnly, but the shock from the event 3 days ago has the whole house in terror, especially Winfield. He sits at his desk with a lamp, lighting his diary as he writes, 3 days have passed. My brother Isaac is dead. My noble, high-minded brother is no more. Shot and beheaded at his own door by the murderous Northern Indians. The agony. On the morning of the 12th, at 2 o'clock, we were awakened by the knocking and shouting at the door. At 2 a.m., 5 people showed up at Winfield's house, banging the door, yelling, screaming. At this point in the night, the Pacific Northwest climate is showing off its rain. As always, Winfield wakes up from the noise and opens the door to a swarm of people he knows well, all yelling similar things. From what he gets from all the fusses, there's an Indian attack, and Mrs. Corliss barely escaped with her life. All the others ran to a different direction, and they need to find them. It's pitch black outside and pouring rain. The search party decides to call it after about an hour or so, and waited until the morning to search again. Mrs. Corliss, whose husband is missing, tells what she knows. Meanwhile, out in the woods not far from Issac Ebbey's home are 6 souls, shaking, freezing, and barefoot, hiding in the darkness. Not completely sure of what just happened, and completely in shock. A wife, fairly certain her husband is dead. A husband whose wife seemingly ran the wrong way and may be dead as well. 4 children who are in shock and confused. Issac Ebbey was the prosecuting attorney, and there was a case recently for a guy named John Reagan who was being tried for murder. Mr. and Mrs. Corliss are there for the case, and so they were staying at Isaac's house for the trial. Mr. Corliss was a cousin of Isaac. The jury found Mr. Reagan guilty, and he was to be hung the next day, August 10th, and so he was. With the case over, the Corlisses were going to head back home, but stayed one more day, and were likely going to be going home on the 12th. All Mrs. Corliss was able to tell that night is that she was sleeping and woke up to screaming and a gunshot. Soon, some Indians were inside the house ransacking the place. Mr. Corliss took control of the situation and sent everyone out a window. Mrs. Corliss was the first one out, and then one of the young boys. It's likely the kids were trained that if something were to ever happen, run to the woods. But as a guest, Mrs. Corliss didn't know, and she ran to the nearest house, which happened to be Robert Hill's house. At the Hills house were 4 men: Robert, his brother Harold, and their friends Mr. Crosby and Mr. Engel. Sometime in the night, the men, who likely were not asleep at this point, heard screaming and then pounding at the door. Mrs. Corliss quickly tells them, "Indian attack, Ebbey's house." They grab their guns and start running. Tells Mrs. Corliss to hide, but she refused and ran down with him, possibly even slowing him down. They run to the beach knowing that the way Indians attack is to attack and then flee back in their canoes. But they get there and see the shadow of a canoe disappearing into the fog. At this point, this group of 5 headed to Winfield's house. In Winfield's diary, he continues writing, "Although the head was not there, I could have recognized him among 1,000. I have seen death before, and have seen the bodies of persons killed by savages, but I have never yet saw so horrible a sight as this. I never before saw the human head severed from the body." We wrapped him up and carried him into the house and laid him on his bed, which he had arose to meet his death. Everything in the different rooms were in the wildest disorder. Beds thrown in the floor, one cut open, trunks broke open, windows mashed to pieces. Soon after an autopsy, it is revealed that Issac was shot in the arm, which broke a bone, and also 2 shots to the chest. At this point in time, no white man had ever been killed by an Indian in this area. The Indians fight amongst themselves all the time, and they traveled long distance to fight sometimes. Militiamen began hunting for northern Indians, and the military as well began hunting them down to try them for murder. All in all, 18 Indians were caught and hung, but who knows if they were the ones that did it. Probably not, but that's how it was back then. Now, Issac Ebbey was a very prominent man. His death was a huge deal, not just because he was white, but because he was one of the first to start life on the island. He was born in Ohio. In Missouri, he studied law. He caught the gold fever, left his family, went to California to make it rich, but didn't. Traveled north to Oregon Territory, came to a city that he named after the Olympia Mountains. The city of Olympia became the Washington state capital. When the United States passed the Donation Land Claim Act, Issac went to Whidbey Island and claimed his free 640 acres. Then he had his family join him once he had everything set up, who finally showed up in 1854. Issac was even partially responsible for naming of King County, which is where Seattle is, for those that don't know. He built a dock at Admiralty Inlet for ships. He was the county representative. He was basically the IRS guy for the area. He was partially responsible for dividing Washington and Oregon into 2 states. And he was the militia colonel for his county during the mainland Indian Wars of 1855 and 56. And as you already know, he was the prosecuting attorney in his county. So why? Why did a group of northern Indians choose to attack Ebbey? Well, they didn't. So here's the story. During the 1850s, Indians from Alaska and Canada, known collectively as Northern Indians, swooped down to the Puget Sound area of Washington and raided people and towns, then swooped on back to their homes. The United States was getting really sick of this, so they sent the military to protect the people. In October of 1856, the USS Massachusetts spotted a bunch of Indians at Port Gamble and ordered them to leave. But these Indians said, nah. So the ship opened fire and killed 27 of them, including some chiefs. Then captured the rest and took them to Victoria. Somehow, word got back to the tribe and they wanted revenge. Their goal was to kill a high-ranking white man, and so they decided on a guy named Dr. Kellogg who lived on Whidbey Island near Issac, where Fort Casey and the Admiralty Head Lighthouse are today. And that was after many other choices over the year that didn't work out. Now, during this time, as you probably can figure out, even if you were just going a town over, that was like a day or two trip. And with Indian raids happening often, and sometimes being called to work in the city, which could be, Port Townsend or Olympia, a lot of people who could had two homes, one for working time and one for the off-season. The Ebbey family moved back and forth from Whidbey Island quite a bit, and as Indian raids became closer to home, some decided to abandon Whidbey Island and live where more people lived for the protection. Well, Dr. Kellogg was one of those people. He temporarily left Whidbey Island a few months before, and at the same time, Issac and his family moved back to Whidbey, half scared, but not enough to abandon their home. On August 8th, the Indians intent on killing Dr. Kellogg show up and come to his house. But to their surprise and complete annoyance, he was not there. He was temporarily gone to Port Townsend for the court case and also getting things situated so that he could move from Whidbey. The Indians hide near his house for a few days, but Kellogg never showed up. Out of anger, remember they've been trying to kill a white chief for about a year now and haven't succeeded, they run and kill a calf and leave it in the field. On the 11th, Issac, his wife, and his cousin, Mr. Corliss, and his wife are out on a porch, on the porch of his home after the trial. They're simply, visiting, enjoying each other's company, and yada yada. Issac, who's a homesteader, has a farmhand who is working over by a barn doing some work, and he noticed that two Indians, a man and a woman, walk up from the direction of the beach to Issac. He reportedly told Issac that their canoe was broken and they needed a hammer and some nails to fix it. Issac said no. He probably did, but he didn't want to have anything to do with the Indians because it could be a trap to throw him off guard. Who knows? As these two Indians walk away, they come to the farmhand who is doing something with oats. The man asks the farmhand, hey, how many people are in that house? Kid replies, there are 7 people. The Indian man then points at Issac and looks at the kid and says, is he some sort of, chief here? The kid looks back to where the Indian is pointing and says, yeah, that's my boss, Issac Ebbey. He's a pretty important guy. The Indians nod and then walk back to the beach. Now, it's dark. Probably 12 or so at night, maybe earlier. The kids are in bed, the Corlisses are in their pajamas in the guest room, in bed as well. Issac and his wife as well. Rover, the family's dog, is outside, and as all good boys do when they sense something wrong, Rover barks. And he barks. And he barks some more. Issac and his wife get up to see what is making the dog freak out. Issac opens the door, Emily, his wife, behind him, and they don't see anything. But Issac does notice that the clothes that got washed were on the line still, and judging by the clouds, it's probably going to rain, so they better head on out, take the clothes back in. So they head out of the house. Except Issac was the only one that stepped foot outside, because he saw some Indians with guns looking right at him. What do you want? Bam! Bam! 2 shots went straight at him. He jumps off the porch and runs around the house. Emily runs to the window, through the house, to the side of the house. An Indian comes into the house and starts sacking the place. Emily looks out a window and sees Issac breathing heavy and holding the top of his head. Emily begs him to come back inside. Then Isaac makes a run for it, probably knowing he was about to die, but hopefully giving his family some time to escape. 2 more shots go off, while Mr. Corliss takes the lead and has everyone leave out the back window and tells them to run for it. Mrs. Corliss, as we all know, ran to the nearest house, while the kids all run to the woods, and Emily and Mr. Corliss do the same. The Indians then, having killed their target, stole what was valuable, and then cut Isaac's head off quickly so they could scalp him later. And as we all know, they got to the canoes and sailed off. Now that is the story of Issac Ebbey and his awful death. But as you might, and as I was when researching this, be curious about the severed head thing. You know, we've all heard of scalping before. Some tribes are especially known for it. So I dug deeper for you. Scalping was not common practice until about the 1600s. The Puritans are actually the ones that started it. They paid for the scalps of Indians, probably for, proof of death. The French Canadians were the first to pay for scalps of non-Indians, and soon the Indians started to adopt the practice themselves. Kind of like the word chief, by the way. The Dutch did something similar. They paid for the hands of runaway slaves. Soon, some tribes did the shrunken head thing. Some scalped quick and dirty, while some, like the Northern Indians, adopted scalping as more of a ritual. Scalping would be done slowly after the death so that the full hair and even the ears would be part of it. And if in a rush, they would just chop off the person's head so they could take it somewhere safe and they'd do the scalping properly. And then they would host a feast and a scalp dance for the warrior who killed a Haigas white chief, who, in this case, would be Issac Ebbey. Now, the reason the scalp is a very interesting part of the story is that it was retrieved. About a year after the killing, some ship captains who were in the Alaska, Canada area doing some trading as the Hudson Bay Company, which is a British company that was big over here in the Pacific Northwest. Well, these captains overheard some Indians talking about Issac Ebbey. He offered them a trade for the scalp, but they refused, and even took that as an act of war against them, probably because the feast and dance hadn't been done yet. Because 3 years later, the captain came back, and they gladly traded for it. At this point, Winfield writes in his diary, "Captain Coop got over from Port Townsend bringing my friend A.M. Poe Esquire. Mr. P brings my brother's scalp, which was retrieved from the northern tribes by Captain Dodd. At last, this memento is received. At last, a portion of the mutilated remains of my dear brother is returned. Near 3 years have elapsed since his murder, and now his poor head returns to his home. The skin of the head is entire contained, the ears and most of the hair. The hair looks quite natural. It is a sad memento of the past." As with all historic oddities, the story doesn't end there. Or maybe it does. Some say the scalp was buried along with Isaac's body, but some say, and it's likely the case, that the scalp was kept as a weird, "Hey, check this out" thing in the Ebbey household. And when Winfield died, it was handed down to Mary, who was Isaac and Winfield's sister. Dr. Kellogg's son is quoted as saying that she, being Mary, showed me the scalp lock still retaining the long black hair. It was the only thing of that kind that I'd ever seen. And I remember it caused cold chills to run over me. When Mary died, it was handed down to Isaac's niece, Almira, who lived in San Francisco. And as far as I could find out, that is the last mention on its whereabouts.